Welcome to the Jet Set Dynasty Podcast. Here is your host, Jordon Nutter.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Jet Set Dynasty Podcast. My name is Jordon Nutter. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyNut. If you listened to our show last week, then you will know that I typically co-host the show with Josh Baer. However, due to technical issues, I am forced to go solo for the time being. I hope you like to listen to the sound of my voice because I am here to whisper sweet fantasy nothings directly into your ears and keep you up to date on all the happenings around the National Football League. I have decided that this close to the season, in order to tackle all the breaking news that is currently pouring out of the NFL before the start of the regular season, that Jet Set Dynasty needs to be a daily podcast. To that end, from this point on, I will be doing shows which I call the Daily Tuneup. These will be 20 to 30 minute shows recapping everything that has happened in the last 24-hour news cycle, as well as talking about anything else that may come across my mind. If you have any questions whatsoever about anything fantasy football, just send them in. You can either contact us via email, jetsetdynasty@superfantasybros.com, or send them to us through Twitter. You can find us on Twitter at JetSetDynasty. Just tweet them at us, and we will pick the best ones and put them on the show. Let's begin with a quick word from our sponsor, superfantasybros.com, the only fantasy football website that catalogs and reviews all the fantasy football content available on the web. We review and rate websites based on a 10-point scale. We have our own rankings and an expanding podcast directory. Become a fantasy scholar with superfantasybros.com, and together, let's win championships. Now, let's get into today's
Daily Tuneup.
The most significant change from around the NFL actually has nothing to do with any player. Over the weekend, the NFL actually announced that they were getting rid of the probable injury classification this season. That means that the three labels that can be placed on an injured player are questionable, doubtful, and out. In the past, questionable meant that the player had about a 50-50% chance to play, and doubtful meant there was a 75% chance that the player wouldn't play. So the NFL decided to get rid of the probable designation and update the terminology of questionable and doubtful as a result. Questionable means that it is uncertain as to whether the player will play in the game or not. And doubtful is now defined that it is unlikely that the player will play. I believe I speak for fantasy football players everywhere when I say, NFL, what the f***? As if injury reports aren't hard enough to dissect as it is. You had to go and make it harder. From everybody in the fantasy football community, I would like to say, f*** you. Now we will not be able to see that probable tag. That means that you will be stuck trying to decipher practice reports on anybody that is listed as questionable. Ultimately, I think this reaffirms everyone's thought that the NFL is desperately in need of new leadership. I cannot think of a single reason why they would make this change other than just to piss people off. Now that I've had time to complain about the NFL's stupid business choices, let's talk about the players. News broke yesterday that Dion Lewis, running back for the New England Patriots, was forced to undergo yet another knee operation. Although the procedure is considered relatively minor, the Boston Herald reports that this operation is expected to sideline Lewis for anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks. Obviously, this is very disappointing news. Lewis looked phenomenal on the field all last year, and fantasy players noticed. He was being drafted around the early to late 4th round in most PPR drafts, according to fantasyfootballcalculator.com. But after the injury, I would expect his ADP to drop rapidly. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see his ADP drop at least 2 or 3 rounds, maybe even 4, 5, or 6. At that point, he'd be falling into the 10th or 11th round, and I think even there, he would be a great pick. Hypothetically, if his ADP did drop that low, he would be drafted around the likes of LeGarrette Blount, DeAndre Washington, Christine Michael, and even James White. However, both White's and Blunt's ADP will likely rise because of this news. Already, I've seen many analysts singing that this injury makes James White a very interesting pick, but I would have to disagree. Did you know that last season James White never received more than 3 carries in any game? He did all of his work out of the passing game. After Dion Lewis went down in Week 9, James White had 33 receptions for 358 yards and 4 touchdowns. In PPR leagues, that's about 13.6 points per game over that span.
Jordan, I don't know. That sounds like a pretty good running back too to me.
Perhaps. But I like to consider the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo will be under center from Week 1 to 4, which certainly makes predicting the target distribution a little murky. White was only serviceable last year from a PPR standpoint. You take away some of his targets, and he's not worth jack shit. There's also the possibility that the Patriots don't use White like they did last year. Earlier in August, the rumor was that DJ Foster, an undrafted free agent out of Arizona State, could potentially push White off of the roster. While I don't think that's actually going to happen, and while I don't think DJ Foster is at all a special talent, I think this speaks more to the fact that James White is not a special talent. He is a mediocre player. He's just a guy, as we like to say. Add that to the fact that James White will probably only play one more game than Dion Lewis, maybe. I don't think there's any way James White can turn out to be a successful fantasy pick. When Dion Lewis is in the lineup, James White is nothing more than a backup. If you're looking for a good running back in the 10th to 12th round range, I think you're probably better served taking LeGarrette Blount than James White. If you want to pick a Patriots running back, personally, I'd be focusing more on DeAndre Washington or Devontae Booker. I do think you're best served this year by avoiding all Patriots running backs as we had done in years past. Please remember that Bill Belichick doesn't give a flying rat's ass about your fantasy team. Personally, if I had to draft a running back in the 10th to 12th round, I would try and go a round earlier and get Bilal Powell in the 9th. Bilal Powell was the 4th best running back in a points per game standpoint last year from the halfway point on. Many people are worried because they brought in Matt Forte, but the Jets staff seems like they're pretty set on using Powell as they did last year. Since that's the case, I think he's definitely a bargain at his current price tag. But the bottom line is, if you own James White in Dynasty, I'd recommend you sell on him now. Right now. Pause this podcast, call whoever owns Dion Lewis, and trade him James White for what I think will be the peak of his value. Odds are that if the owner who owns Dion Lewis was counting on his production in that week 1 to 7 window, he will probably pay a decent price to get what most view as his handcuff in James White. Ultimately, I don't think this affects Dion Lewis' dynasty stock too much. I still really like him. He's still a great player when he's on the field. He's still young. This is just a minor setback. Don't go panicking or selling him for less than he's worth. Just hold on to him. He'll be back in the second half of the season, and he'll show you what he showed us the first half of last season. Moving on. Reports recently broke that Trevor Siemian will be starting for the Broncos in their 3rd preseason game. Thus, once again proving that no matter what Mark Sanchez does, he will never be a successful NFL quarterback. Mark Sanchez kills everything he touches. The Sanchez has managed to blow every single chance that he has had to get a starting job, whether in Denver, Philadelphia, or New York. Mark Sanchez will mostly spend the rest of his career standing on the sidelines holding a clipboard. And that's the way it should be. He's dead. His career is utterly dead. In fact, I should call right now and get a tombstone made.
Hello?
Hey there, I need to order a gravestone that says, "Here lies Mark Sanchez's hopes and dreams." No. I don't care how much it costs. I feel that no cost is too great to properly pay tribute to the deceased. If you own Demaryius Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders in Dynasty, I think you should be a little concerned about their 2016 production. I certainly don't think Trevor Siemian will be capable of sustaining both of their production. I think this news also most likely means that you will see Paxton Lynch make starts at some point in the season. And honestly, I think that's what's best for the Denver Broncos. They need to lean on their elite defense and allow the young quarterback of the future to learn the position by playing it, much like Russell Wilson got to do in Seattle, much like a young Ben Roethlisberger got to do when he first started his career. Let the running game and defense be the strength of your team, and slowly bring along Paxton Lynch as he adapts to the speed of the game and to learn by playing it. Some will say that a focus on the running game in Denver bodes well for C.J. Anderson. I personally disagree. I would expect by the end of the season for Devontae Booker to emerge as the lead back. C.J. Anderson, I feel like, has consistently seen his fantasy stock rise due to great playoff play and due to one successful 2014 season. But personally, I'm not a fan. I'm not sold. I'm not buying it. C.J. Anderson is going as early as the second or third round. Last year, he was one of those first round busts that people all talk about. Go zero running back, pick wide receivers early, and get Devontae Booker in the 10th or 11th round. Let some other sucker deal with C.J. Anderson. Take the better back at a cheaper price. If Devontae Booker didn't have that knee injury coming out, he probably would have been drafted much higher. There is no reason whatsoever that Booker should have been drafted after C.J. Prosise or Kenyon Drake. Devontae Booker is the superior back, and I believe that will show this year in Denver. So over the weekend, in the Redskins preseason action, Matt Jones went down with a shoulder injury. And who should come in to replace him? It wasn't Keith Marshall. It was Rob Kelly. I'm sure you're thinking what I'm thinking. Who the hell is Rob Kelly? Rob Kelly is an undrafted free agent out of Tulane, weighing in at 226 pounds and standing in at 5 foot 11 inches. If you pull up his player profile on playerprofiler.com, you will see what is one of the most disappointing athletes in the NFL. Very bad 40-yard dash time, very little agility, not a good bench press, and a very weak burst score. He has a first percentile SparkX score. The guy is not an athlete whatsoever. His best comparable player is Matt Asiata. So that tells you that this guy is a guy that's just going to pound through the line and try and keep his feet pumping as long as he can. Rob Kelly isn't anybody that I'm going to own in any dynasty format. Rob Kelly is somebody that some sucker thinks will have a chance to be successful because he has a starting job, if you ask me. For redraft purposes, it seems utterly irrelevant. The Redskins believe Matt Jones will be back for week 1. I certainly have questions as to his effectiveness in the lead back role, but the Redskins seem set on giving it to him. Ultimately, I'd rather have Chris Thompson on my team, especially in PPR formats, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the Redskins make a play for Carlos Williams if he ever gets back in shape. So moving on to our next bit of news, Kelvin Benjamin is apparently being pushed for the wide receiver 1 spot by Devin Funchess. One of our writers at Super Fantasy Bros, Cameron Nutter, actually wrote an article on the subject last week before this blurb came out. Check it out, it's definitely worth a read. He uses some nice RotoViz tools to do a great comparison between the two players. You can check that out at superfantasybros.com/analysis and get all the detailed information that he talks about in that article. Ultimately, what you need to know is that Devin Funchess' ADP is currently sitting in the 10th round. At the beginning of this month, Funchess was going as late as the 12th, but his ADP has slowly been rising as we've progressed through August and the preseason. Whereas Kelvin's ADP has for some reason stayed consistent right around the late 3rd to early 4th round. This is a situation that should be a no-brainer for fantasy owners, but sadly, I know it isn't, so I'll break it down a bit for you. Kelvin Benjamin's successful 2014 season was almost completely a product of volume. They had no other targets, and the fact that Cam Newton did as well as he did last year with Ted Ginn and Philly Brown on the outside is nothing short of remarkable. If you were making a case for Cam Newton not to be the QB1 in fantasy, I don't know how you're making that case, now that he actually has 2 good wide receivers starting for him. Funchess came along a little bit slower, but he's had a whole year now to get acquainted with the offense, while Benjamin was sitting on the sideline nursing his knee. He came on strong in the final part of last season, and he's a big target, much like Kelvin Benjamin. He was a much better college producer, and you're getting him a whole 6 rounds after Benjamin. In fact, haven't we all